Do you guys have any election day and night and day before election coping strategies? I myself am making my husband get rid of all the leftover Halloween candy. There was a certain amount of overbuying because otherwise I am going to be shoveling it in my mouth from now until the moment the election is decided, and maybe after that. What are you guys going to do?
I had whiskey for breakfast.
James, bourbon? What?
I finished all my bourbon in the run-up to the election. I try to go play basketball to clear my head, but the problem is it's right outside the local polling location, so it's a line of people voting, and it just adds to the anxiety.
All right. Well, I have some Halloween candy if you need it.
Okay.
This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show where we bring you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about, for better or for worse. I'm Ruth Marcus, a columnist, and today we're thinking about, yes, you knew this, Election Day. So it's hard to know right now how the next few days or weeks will go. If the race is as close as the polls seem to indicate, it could take a while, or longer than a while, for things to be settled, as it did during the election in 2020. And I might point out 2000. So I wanted to get together with a couple of my colleagues to talk about what to look for tomorrow and in the coming weeks, and about how we're all feeling and thinking about this election and what comes after.
I'm Dana Milbank.
I'm James Hohmann.
And we're at the end of a grueling campaign. As political columnists who've seen a few, how does this compare to the others you've covered? And Dana, as the graybeard here, you go first.
Well, this reminds me of 1928. I mean, every election now, we say, is the most important election of our lifetime until, of course, the next election. But there's more anxiety this time, I think. The 2016, you could say, well, people didn't really see that coming. They didn't take Trump for real. Well, 2020, it was the pandemic and the economy had collapsed. But right now, I feel like we're going to really see what the soul of the nation is. And I hope I know the answer to it. But the answer may be that this is a MAGA nation. So, if Trump wins tomorrow or in the subsequent weeks or months, whatever it takes, I think, we won't be able to just dismiss this as some sort of a fluke. This will be fundamentally who we are as a country. So that's what, this is sort of for all the marbles, and that is what has me full of anxiety.
Yeah. James, how do you think about it? All the marbles?
Well, it reminds me of the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, and it's Donald Trump, How to Lose an Election in 10 Days, because it did feel a couple weeks ago to me that he was going to win and that it was going to be a depressing mandate for what he wants to do, and that he would get the Senate and the House, and he would have a trifecta, and he would be surrounded by people who want to help him enact an agenda that the three of us strongly disagree with. But I don't think that is who we are as Americans, and I think that is starting to break through. And so I spent this weekend in Pennsylvania, and I was there the weekend before last, and the mood has shifted. I really do believe if the election was 2 weeks ago, Trump would have won Pennsylvania in the election. And it feels like the late deciders are breaking for Kamala Harris. And it feels like people are activated and that Harris is sort of nailing her marks at the right time. And it does really feel like Trump is tired and the people are fatigued of his shtick, even his own supporters. I went to a Trump rally on Sunday morning and a J.D. Vance rally on Sunday afternoon. And the crowds were small. They were low energy. Vance was high energy. He gave a strong speech. But Trump he spent half an hour at the top of the speech basically laying the groundwork to claim the election's being stolen. He made up out of whole cloth this whole story about all these fake ballots being dumped in the county where he was speaking. He said he shouldn't have given up power in 2020. He said that he wouldn't mind if reporters got shot. And, use the glass on the stage as a prop. It's not funny, but to me, it was not the message of a winner. And I was really struck. I saw Susie Wiles one of his top 2 campaign advisors, trying to get his attention on the stage as Trump was rambling on an hour and a half into this speech, trying to get him to rap. And he just kept talking and going. And the crowd was streaming out. It felt like the rally of someone who knows he's losing. And it was such a contrast to the night before, where Michelle Obama filled up this high school gymnasium and an overflow gymnasium. And there were thousands of mostly women and their daughters who were just like ready to crawl over glass to go vote for Kamala Harris. And it really changed my whole impression. Anyway, we'll see what happens. I think it's close. I've talked too long, but I'm feeling much more.
It's a totally fascinating from the ground report. And I'm curious, Dana, whether your gut and your experience on the ground or elsewhere is giving you the same, let's just be clear about this, because we know where we're coming from, the same hopefulness and what you think is going on here.
Yeah, I don't think James talked too long. In fact, I'd like him to talk longer. My blood pressure dropped about 20 points during that, and I'm thinking of cutting my whiskey ration in half for lunch. So that helps a lot. I've been burned so many times by making forecasts in the Trump era, but I want to believe that. I have seen those same sorts of straws in the wind. You see the Iowa poll. The Des Moines Register poll has a very good track record, and it had this shocking result showing Harris winning Iowa, what was it, by 3 or 4 points. Now, I don't think any of us seriously believes Harris is going to win Iowa, but the very fact that she's even remotely competitive there, I think, did Trump win it by 8 points or something? So whatever it is, it would seem to show certainly a shift and certainly momentum in her direction. I happen to be married to a pollster, so I'm hearing this at all hours of day and night. But there's not a lot of evidence of new Republican voters having early voted. It doesn't look like Trump has activated anybody new, and he certainly is acting like a loser. You know, the things that James was alluding to. He seems to be way out of control again. Not that he was ever totally under control. But you don't start having jokes about oral sex and killing reporters if you're feeling like you're coasting to a win. So there are positive straws, but we've been surprised so many times that I'm not confident.
So, James, what's your diagnosis of what's going on here? In other words, you talked about how to lose an election in 10 days. Does Trump want to lose? Can he simply not control himself? He clearly is making decisions to ignore, as you say, Susie Wiles trying to cut him off. You know, that's a pretty extraordinary scene you described with the campaign manager trying to make the candidates basically stop talking. He doesn't want to take direction. But to what do you attribute this shift in the zeitgeist, if we're getting it correctly? And I'm just going to go with the shift.
Yeah, totally. I think that it's a lack of control, but Trump thinks this is what works. Trump thinks that this is how he won in the past, and this is what he needs to double down on. He trusts his own instincts over his advisors. He does feel like, I do think a few weeks ago, Trump was very confident he was going to win, and now the mood has changed. And it was, everything that's happening gets under his skin. The huge turnout for the Michelle Obama rally the night before was under his skin. He sort of went off on Michelle Obama and said, I've been respectful to her before, but now I'm not going to be respectful to her. And I think he is just animated by grievance and frustration and a lack of discipline. And he thinks sort of being, quote, real or authentic is what's going to animate his base, because that's what animates him, is the grievance and the revenge. And maybe it will, but I hope it doesn't.
He thinks it's working, but it's actually boomeranging and hurting him. Is that the way you see it?
Exactly. Yeah.
This actually leads me to one thing I wanted to talk about, which is abortion, which is on the ballot in 10 states, mostly in an effort to guarantee the constitutional right to abortion until viability that the Supreme Court took away from women in America 2 long years ago. Do you think that the abortion issue is going to be as energizing this election as it has been in the last few years?
Different states, it is more energizing than others. I think it is one of the great unknowns. In Arizona and Nevada, I think it really does help Democrats. It will get younger people who may not love Kamala Harris over Israel or whatever to vote, and then they will vote for her. I was in Michigan a few weeks ago, and I was really struck at a Democratic field office in an area where Democrats had made big gains in 2022 on the abortion issue. A Democratic state representative and others who had just been door knocking were lamenting to me that abortion isn't the galvanizing issue it was 2 years ago, and that these kind of suburban moderate women were telling them at the doors, well, we've now codified abortion rights in our state constitution, so a national abortion ban isn't going to undo that. I mean, I think that there is an underlying motivational factor, and I think that one of the reasons Iowa, I think, has tightened is because they imposed this draconian abortion ban. And I think that there is a backlash to that. And so I think it still is certainly a net plus for Harris, but I don't think it's as much of a net plus as in 2022. Though, if Democrats end up doing better than sort of they've been expected to do, I think it's just like 2 years ago, we're underestimating the degree to which this is still a very galvanizing force.
Yeah, I think there actually is some data already because so many people have voted early. So in a way, the post-election polling is already underway. And among Democratic voters, you're seeing a strong resonance of the democracy argument and also the abortion argument. So I'm not at all sure that the abortion argument has diminished in any way. And you're also seeing it in just this extraordinary gender gap, unlike anything we've seen in politics before.
Yeah, I have to say, as somebody who did not anticipate, in fact, got completely wrong, the salience of the abortion argument as a political motivator in the aftermath of Dobbs, I think it is, to choose a relevant verb, it really has persisted. And it is going to, if it does, make the difference in this campaign. And speaking of making the difference, I wanted to talk about the ground game. I'm curious, Dana, you were in North Carolina. What is your assessment of the ground game situation there? And then, James, we'll go to you on that very subject.
Yeah, I think this is something that obviously doesn't show up in the polling. And it's, in a very close election, which by all accounts this should be, it does give a fairly significant advantage to Harris. Yeah, so I spent several days running around North Carolina where there's 360 paid staffers, which they've been putting in place for the better part of a year. More than 40,000 volunteers have signed up since Harris became the nominee, and there were even, more of the party faithful before that. And it's just such a mechanized operation, 4 canvassing operations every day, hitting what I think it's 100,000 or so a week on top of, a couple million phone calls. And, Trump, I mean, certainly they have something of a field operation, but they've largely outsourced this to Elon Musk. So I think, if the election is essentially a dead heat, then just getting more of your people to turn out is going to be all the difference. And, it's under the radar. You don't really see this, but it's in operation in all the swing states.
Field is like special teams. It's an extra point. And so when the race is tied, it can make a difference. One of the things people forget is 4 years ago during the pandemic, the Biden campaign did no real ground game. They weren't putting people at doors. Organized labor pulled back on door knocking, and the Trump folks and the RNC actually did have a robust field program. I went down to North Carolina in 2020 and followed along Trump door knockers, and the Biden campaign wasn't door knocking at all. And so it's almost a political science experiment. And I do think that's part of the explanation for why Trump overperformed the polls as much as he did in 2020 was because the Republicans had a field effort that the Democrats just didn't have. The party's coalitions are changing. We're going through this realignment that Trump has hastened, and Republicans are now much more dependent than they really ever have been in our lifetimes on low propensity voters. They're counting on this, the manosphere, the Joe Rogan listener, the crypto bro, the guy who vapes, and these are not high propensity voters. And so traditionally the Republican base was the people who reliably turned out. Now the Democratic base is much more reliable to turn out. And Trump is counting on all these people who didn't vote in 2020, and maybe some of them vote, maybe enough of them vote. I don't know if this is an appropriate comment to say, but it feels like if the election's going to come down to whether men or women are better at meeting deadlines and showing up to vote and filling out paperwork, the women are going to win that. every time.
That is a great place to take a break. Underscoring that point, there's a lot more to talk about, and we're going to get back into it just after this break.
Hi, this is Megan McArdle. I'm a journalist and opinion columnist here at The Post. And today I want to recommend the podcast called Reflector. Reflector's team and I recently did 3 episodes where we dove deep into America's political history of making claims that a U.S. election was stolen.
A lot of Republicans believe that the election was stolen, and they want Nixon to fight. And Nixon doesn't. He concedes.
Once the decision is made, we unite behind the man who was elected.
I know that many listeners are always on the hunt for a new podcast, and Reflector's not only a place to find great stories, they're also committed to fairness, independence, and nonpartisanship in their coverage of even some of the thorniest issues facing our society. To listen, just search Reflector in whatever app you're using to listen to this podcast right now. And thanks.
Welcome back. I'm Ruth Marcus, and this is Impromptu. I think it's important for us to have a conversation about the morning after. Whenever the morning after comes, whether it's the morning after Election Day or the morning after however many days it takes to get the apparent election results settled. And the reason I ask this question is that I'm just increasingly worried that whatever happens, but particularly if Donald Trump were to lose this, air quotes, rigged election, that we are going to have some combination of riots in the streets and riots in the courts and an unwillingness, once again, to accept the results of an election. We've been here before, but I think that this is going to be different in some ways in terms of the intensity on both sides of the aisle. And I'm wondering what you guys are braced for.
Well, now, look, I don't want any of you to bolt off the set when I say this, but, Donald Trump has set it up so there are 2 possible outcomes. Either he wins or the Democrats cheated. So there's no question but that if he loses, he will fight it. And the extent to which he can be successful at this, I don't mean necessarily in overturning the election, but in causing a huge ruckus, goes to, which party is controlling the House. If Mike Johnson is returned as Speaker, you could certainly see a rebellion against certifying the election there. Now, will there actually be outright violence?
To interrupt you for 1 second, Dana, for our listeners, because it's the new House, not the pre-existing House, that will be certifying. Yes.
Exactly, right. And so if the Democrats do win control of the House, things would be much more orderly, and by the book or by the Constitution, as we used to say in the United States of America. So that'll be the big legal question there. Obviously, a Democrat is in control of the White House and the National Guard and all the other issues that we saw on January 6th the last time. But, it doesn't take much for there to be violence, and Trump is already, increasingly violent in his rhetoric, against reporters, against Liz Cheney, against Harris, against all of his opponents. So, I don't want to predict violence, but it doesn't take a whole lot of people for there to be violence. Look, if it goes the other way, I think you're going to see a lot of Democrats out in the street.
Yep, this is not Bush v. Gore.
Well, there was the Brooks Brothers riot.
There was the Brooks Brothers riot, but in the end, Al Gore accepted the decree of the Supreme Court for better or for worse. And I have to say, I don't see that kind of going gently moment occurring in 2024. James, would you care to cheer us up, or do you want to just bring us further down the rabbit hole of post-electoral despair?
No, I mean, I agree with Dana, but I am sort of hopeful that, this time, unlike January 6th, 2021, Democrats are in charge. I worry the Supreme Court is, held in so much lower esteem for understandable reasons than 24 years ago. And the perceived legitimacy of a decision handing the presidency to Donald Trump, I shudder to think about how people would react to that. So I worry that we're in for an uneasy period. I do think one of the things we tend to do in the media is sort of like fight the last war. And I don't think 2024, while it will probably be contested, will play out exactly like 2020. The January 6th, Trump will find new ways to muck up the works. He won't run the same exact playbook again. And the Capitol is like going to be so secure. They've put up, it's a scary sign of the times, but they've put up these big fences around the Naval Observatory where Kamala Harris lives. They're ready for like violence that I hope as a result, and partly deterrence from 1,300 prosecutions of the January 6th rioters won't happen this time.
Well, on that quasi-cheery note,
quasi-hopeful.
We're out of time. Thanks, James and Dana, for joining me for this episode of Impromptu. See you on the other side.
See you later, Ruth. I was waiting for Dana to make a whiskey joke, but
I think that's optimistic, saying you'll see us on the other side.
Bottoms up, Dana. One more thing before we all go. Here's a quick word from our humor columnist, and God knows we need her, Alexandra Petri.
The election is close, both literally and literally. It's so close and so close that I now feel that I fully know how Schrodinger's cat feels. I'm sitting there waiting for someone to look at the results and let me know if I can get out of the box ever again. Or not. I'm in the stage of election anxiety where I'm like, maybe we can make plans for after the election, but maybe I'll have to go wander off to the woods and scream. Maybe we can get drinks on Thursday, or maybe I will be a pulsating fog of continued anxiety as ballots from states roll in. Maybe we can go for a walk or a bike ride, take our respective toddlers to the zoo, go see Conclave, or maybe I will just be staring at the television and screaming just forever. I read an article about how to mitigate your election anxiety. You were supposed to visualize the outcome you dread and write down some good things that could come of it. But this is also an election where every tiny thing feels like it matters. You can't breathe in this election season without thinking you're going to butterfly effect something in Pennsylvania. What if I buy paper to write down the good things that could come out of this election, and somehow the stationery store knows that was why I needed the paper, and I send an economic signal, and it alters the results? No! I just have to sit here in my box, neither dead nor alive, waiting to hear the results of the experiment. Election day is Tuesday, but also the results will take weeks. Everyone's nervous and on edge. No one's at their best. Judging from the emails I'm getting from the campaigns, the only persons or entities more stressed about the election than I am are the campaigns themselves. I got an email from Kamala Harris this morning at like 7 a.m. just saying, uh-oh. I guess the one relief is that when the election ends, we won't get any more of these emails. That is, if it ends at all.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson, edited by Damir Marusik, Chris Sullentrop, and Allison Michaels, and mixed by Emma Munger. Chris Rucan designed our art. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. We love hearing from you. Email us at impromptu@washpost.com. And if you're enjoying the show, we'd love for you to rate it or leave us a review.